Professor Dave Collum, thanks for being on the show today.
Hey, my pleasure. Glad to meet you.
Same to you. So you're a professor of organic chemistry at Cornell. I know you from your investing side, and then I read you now as like some sort of rogue reporter on dark topics. So how did this happen? How are you? What's your story?
Well, first of all, I want to ask you a couple of questions about you since we have not met.
Yeah.
What is your background? Where do you live? Where do you come from? What did you do in high school?
Yeah.
You know,
I'm from Boston, Mass, that area. Went to business.
yeah, my son lives in Boston.
Oh, yeah?
We should meet up.
Oh, nice. That's where I'm from. I'm not sure if I should tell you where I live. I live in California.
Oh, so the People's Republic of California, right? You're a little fuzzy in case that matters to you.
No, that's fine.
I don't know if it's...
Yeah, it should be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm from Massachusetts. I went to a business school called Babson out there.
I know Babson. Yeah, very entrepreneur-driven.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Moved to California with a couple friends and thought we'd have fun out here for a few years. And now, of course, I'm married with 2 kids.
So it started with drugs and ended up with sex.
There you go. There you go. It's a good way to summarize it. And yeah, I have my own business, which is
How old are your kids? How old are your kids?
They are 5 and 3 right now.
Wow. Great ages.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing.
My favorite age, I think, was about 18 months to 2 years, but I think that was my favorite.
This is
because you finally can tell you what they're thinking.
Yeah.
You go, holy shit, that's what was going on in there,
yeah.
really?
No, it's an amazing age. I'm loving it right now because they're more capable than 18 months or 2 years, but they're still cute. Like they're still hanging on to that, and still fun and funny. Right. So yeah, it's a great time.
You seem like a pleasant guy, so I'm going to assume your wife's hot. So I'm going to assume your kids are cute. So
I appreciate that.
I could be wrong. You might have.
I wouldn't know if you're wrong. I wouldn't. I'm too biased to know. So.
Yeah. Well, if you think she's hot, that's all that matters.
Exactly. So yeah, and I run my own business, and the podcast was about this. My business is.
What is Build Remote? What is Build Remote?
I'm a remote work consultant. I help companies figure out how to run a business without an office.
So my son actually works for the Council on Foreign Relations, working out of Dublin, New Hampshire.
Okay. Wow. What is he?
So he set it up that way. So he was working at the council on site. He was the director of event management, which is an entertaining place to be because all the biggest douchebags in the world go through the council.
Yeah.
And I one time asked him who was the biggest douchebag. He gave me an answer, and I go, that guy and I get along really well. How can he be the biggest douchebag? I don't understand. He's been nothing but nice to me. But in any event, and then he decided to move to South America.
Oh, wow.
And he set it up such that he could do it from there. And there were people there who didn't want to let him do it. And so he went to the higher ups and said, hey, I'm going to be leaving. Just want to say goodbye, blah, blah, blah. And they said, why? He said, well, I tried to set it up and it's not going to work. And all of a sudden the word from above said, make it work.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
So he went to Uruguay and had a second kid down there and ran events. The daily events were being run from Uruguay.
Wow, that's crazy.
Then he moved to Dublin, New Hampshire.
Yeah, I mean it's a huge trend. Obviously, the remote work thing. It ties into all of it.
Is that going to stick, or do you think they're going to eventually drag people back to the office?
They are dragging people back to the office, but they're not. But they're kicking and screaming. Essentially, is where we're at.
Well, a recession will cure that problem.
What'd you say?
A recession will cure that problem.
Yeah.
Right now, it's a buyer's market. I mean, it's a seller's market for labor.
Yeah.
And so the companies don't dare press their luck. But when jobs are rare, people will do anything for the job, including actually work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what is likely to be true is you'll never get 10 or 15 or 20 important people in a room together in one place ever again.
Yeah.
I think the guys whose time really is precious to them are going to be Zooming shit.
Right.
There's no reason not to.
Yeah. It just compressed the time and money down by like
nothing.
99%, yeah, down to the cost of electricity. It's
Right,
yeah,
exactly. And although that's probably going up too.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Um,
And then you went to Babson. That was undergrad or grad?
undergrad. Yep,
And then you head out into the world to try to make money.
yep.
So you're an entrepreneur. Babson therefore did their job.
Yes,
Is
sort of.
is the business rocking, or are you sort of in the building
Oh,
phase
in the
where
building phase.
you
It's by no.
so you're eating a lot of Cheerios and hot dogs
Yeah,
and stuff?
yeah. It's uh, it's by no means where it needs to be, but it's growing. So, um,
That's good.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, I was listening to you on a different podcast, and you had mentioned how you get 12 good years with your kids. If we're
Right.
going back to the kid thing, and my oldest is about to have her 6th birthday, and so I was like, that was
You're halfway there.
yeah, halfway there, and then a third of the way there on them being in the house. So that's
Right. But when she turns like 12 or 13, she's going to become a little bitch. And you're going to be looking at her going, what happened to you? You used to like to hug
yeah,
me and adored me, and now you just want to get in my face and make me wish I'd die.
yeah, yeah. I've
And
heard
then where
that.
the boys are different. The boys are like in the movie Ben-Hur, where he's in prison and they're trying to decide whether he's alive. And they go, "Oh, we shove food under the door," and it keeps disappearing.
Yeah,
And and so if you don't want to have a fight with them, you just don't bother them. But the girls come out. I don't have any of the girls, so I'm speaking
yeah.
from friends. But they come out of the room looking for a fight. The boys want you to not go near them.
Well, I'm also woefully unequipped because I'm one of 4 boys. So that was really straightforward, and that was everything's pretty
And now you have
straightforward with boys.
daughters. What do you have?
Now I have 2 daughters, so I have no
Okay,
clue
so
what's
so when I
coming.
had my second son, I thought this is fantastic. I don't actually have to change.
Yeah,
That's good.
yeah,
People think I'd be a terrible father of a daughter, and I'm going, I don't know. I don't know.
yeah.
I, I think I might be loose. I think I might not be.
That's what we said about.
They think I
That's what we said about
beat up boyfriend.
about my dad because he had 4 boys. It's like you couldn't put a daughter in hand-me-downs just constantly. When she's 14,
Right.
she's not still going for the hand-me-downs. I don't think.
I don't think 14-year-old girls are into. Well, they might be. I don't know. In this day and age, you never know. You
That's
just
true.
got to put her in a transgender program and hope.
That's right. Um. So how about you? How the heck are you where you are with all these different aspects of your life and career?
Um, so as a kid, I was wild, but not uncontrollably wild. So my friends' parents always wanted my friends to hang with me because they thought I was the good one. Meanwhile, I was the guy who could score a pound of pot in an afternoon and make sure everyone got stoned by evening, but I think the parents were noticing that I had something more than just, unbridled, crazy. And so I think there was reason to say, look, just let him be. He'll get through this phase we call childhood and come out the other side okay. I wasn't a great student. I got into Cornell due to sort of backdoor, side door channels. I wouldn't have gotten in. I was a 3.4 GPA. I've read admissions. Your 3.4 GPA is about 6/10 away from an admissions. But my grandfather was president of the Alumni Association, so there's kind of that. And vice chancellor of the Board of Regents, which gives the ag school all its money, so there's kind of that. And a GOP guy, and so there's kind of that. And so I got admitted. What a shock. And then worked every waking hour when I was undergrad. I was terrified that I would flunk out. I'm out of my league now. And starting from fresh, I can remember my GPAs. It's actually ridiculous. I can remember individual grades in every course. And I sort of climbed from like a 3.0 to a 4.0 over 4 years. And then I was going to go to med school. And then at the very last minute, bailed, and as a genetics major, went off to get a PhD in organic chemistry. So I used electives to take some organic chemistry and said, oh, that's what I want to do. So went off to Columbia. I had a great organic chemistry division. Did a miracle on ice moment. You an athlete? I bet you are. Is that a good guess?
Yep.
You got the chiseled look.
Hey,
you don't look like it. You don't have a doughboy look. When you're my age, you get the doughboy look. And so I went to grad school and I worked for an assistant professor. That was an unusual move because I went there to work for a famous guy. I wanted a big time job. I wasn't going to grad school to be a chemist. I went to grad school to try to win. And so I wanted a job like Cornell. And so I went to work for this famous guy, and there's this young guy, and I said, there's something about this guy. There's really something special. It turns out I was right. He was kind of a once every 20-year type organic chemist. So in my second year, we did something that made us both exceedingly famous. And so at the end of my second year of grad school, I got an unsolicited interview offer from Cornell. So I decided to apply for jobs and applied for 12 jobs and got 14 interviews. And the other unsolicited one was Caltech. And that was a heady moment. So at that point, I was the most overrated grad student in the history of academia, which is 800 years. But so I'm interviewing, and I'm just, I'm sort of deer in the headlights. I actually was very good for a third year grad, but so what, right? So I realized I needed a nurturing environment, so I came back to Cornell because I knew it would be. And then I switched fields again within organic chemistry, at least this time. But I went from what's called a synthetic chemist to a physical organic chemist, and that's where you go from making stuff to understanding stuff. So it's that simple. I ended up getting in a very complicated field in which the more we dug, the more we find out everyone was wrong. You can see this plot thickening now, right? So almost every paper we ever published is like, oh, by the way, I know they gave this guy a Nobel Prize, but this is simply not working the way he said, that sort of thing. And if there's any chemists listening, it's a good example is Crown Ether. It's got a Nobel Prize from a guy who invented them in 1968. You won't know what it is, but I'll tell you, they were considered spectacular molecules. And when we studied how they work, they're not that spectacular. They don't work the way that people said they work. And I go, okay. What that did for me is it developed a taste for complexity. So the field we're in was very complicated. And I was missing a lot of background. So I don't have calculus, for example. I don't have any math. They put me in a bad course when I was an undergrad. They said, okay, he's a meatball, so let's put him in this stupid math for idiots. And but the field I'm in is mathematical. So, my students do the math. But it kind of taught me how to kind of Navy SEAL it, MacGyver it. And, when you don't, I always say, don't ever ask, how do you do something? Because the answer is always, I don't know. Without fail, if you have to ask a question, you've got your answer. And so the question is, who knows how to do it? And I learned to find the person who knows how to do it. So this is kind of an Elon Musk approach, maybe. He might do that, although he had much, much bigger brain, right? And much more ambition and things like that. I'm reading his biography right now. It's very entertaining. So I developed a taste for complexity. I developed a belief that experts who are trying to get it dead right can get it dead wrong many times. And so I have this one skill that very few people have, and that is I can look at a panel of experts and say, I think you're all full of shit. And very, very few people have that, right? Deferring to credentialed experts is a natural, right? That's almost biological, right? In a tribal social animal, deferring to experts is sort of wired into our DNA. So my ability to say, no, I think you're wrong is rare. And every once in a while I'll come up with something that really someone else should have done. And I don't know how they missed it. I just don't know how. And it's all with Gedanken experiments. It's always just, I'm just kind of pondering it. And I go, no, that actually doesn't make sense the more I think about it. And again, I don't think I'm that smart. I think I'm smarter than my dad thought I was. He once said to me, I knew you were smart enough to go to college, but that was about it. I said, you didn't realize I was doing like 5% effort? I was literally doing nothing. He does remember the time when he opened up my report card and he said, I remember vividly, he said, I don't remember you being sick 27 days this quarter. And I go, yeah, I had a bad stretch there, didn't I? And so that got me interested. I think that I liked markets as a kid. I used to talk to my dad. My dad owned a company, and he a construction company. And we had sort of ground level economic discussions at the dinner table fairly routinely. So I'd say something stupid like everyone should be paid the same. He'd say no, because people are different quality. I go, oh, okay, that makes sense. And so I can remember one vividly, one that stuck, and it was so amazing. It stuck. We were talking about the Depression. I said, so you could get stinking rich buying real estate in the middle of the 1930s. He said, yeah, but no one had any money. And somehow that stuck. And it got translated into you have to have money when everything goes on sale, which then was just a minor step to say, well, therefore you got to get out of the markets when it's expensive.
Yep.
And so I got lucky. There was a huge amount of luck. So I was in bonds through most of the 80s, which paid well. Everything did. You had to be a moron to lose money in the 80s. I mean, everything did well. The 87 crash, and again, I'd long since lost my interest in going to Wall Street, which I thought about as a high school kid. But I was talking to a senior colleague and said, you really have some stocks. I mean, they're really, you should have them. And so post 87 crash, I went into equities. I moved strongly and steadily into equities. And I was a raging bull most way through the 90s. I had Dell, I had WorldCom, I had all these companies. What I was rare is I actually got out in 99.
Wow. So
I was a raging bull, and which really was a sign of a bubble. I'm the guy at a dinner party who says, oh, I own Qualcomm, And it's like, yeah, they've now sold it to the last idiot. I didn't own Qualcomm, but I looked at eBay. That was the only .com I looked at. But I got out of WorldCom with a 700% gain, sevenfold gain. And I didn't know that it was a total fraud. So it wasn't genius. It was luck. Got out of Dell before they went down the slope. Had years in the late 90s that were 100+% net gainers years. I had some spectacular years. And then by mid-99, I was 100% out of equities.
Wow.
Because I had started to really study the structure of markets and said, okay, these markets are wrong. This is not. I'd read, Galbraith's The Great Crash 1929 and things like that. And I go, this plot has played out before. This is going to be a problem. And so amazingly, I somehow, and I don't even remember how, besides moving into cash, which was obvious. And when I moved into cash, I said, okay, you still got a 9.5% mortgage. So I just paid that off because that's a 9.5% return for just sitting there. And then I went into, besides cash equivalent, short-term bonds, stuff like that. I bought a bunch of gold. And I've had people say to me, well, it was really easy to buy gold back then. It was really cheap. And I go, there were 5 of us in the goddamn world who thought gold was a good idea. You think you have a really good idea, you will be a lonely person. You will not have friends. So I bought a bunch of gold from 290 down to 270, and the Nasdaq was still soaring, and I'm feeling more and more pain just watching it. So knowing it can't last, but still get the beatings were severe. I told this in a podcast recently or maybe I tweeted, I don't know. I was sitting at a table at Pfizer where I was consulting after work, and we were all having beer. And the Nasdaq had crept over 5,000, and I said, it's going to be triple digits. And they all laughed at me. Got to what, 11, 15 or something? So it was real close to triple digits. But they couldn't fathom it. It was not even imaginable to them that a market could lose 80%. And so I also had a short position in the prudent bear fund. Now I've done that twice and I made about 30 or 40% both times, but I'll never do it again. That I should not be. You shouldn't short the market, in my opinion. When you think the markets are dangerous, just get out of the way. Shorting is for shorts is for fools and pros, and the Venn diagram of those two is probably 100%. So then I was worried about inflation that never really emerged. I mean, we know we get lied to about inflation, right? We know inflation is much worse than it is, than they say, and stuff like that. But I thought it was going to show up bigly. You know the term bigly comes from, right? That's the Trump term. He didn't say bigly. People thought he said bigly. He said big league, but it got turned into bigly, and I like bigly better. So I was worried about inflation. So I was trying to buy commodities. I actually talked to Jimmy Rogers' partner, getting Clyde Harrison, for about 2 hours about their commodity fund that they set up. But it was based on derivatives. I didn't like that. But that's how you buy commodities. But I just wasn't emotionally prepared to play the derivatives market like that. And it wasn't even planned. I just buy the fund. But I talked to the market, one of the 8 market makers. He didn't convince me, and so I said, screw it. So I went into my Fidelity accounts and bought 6, I think it was about 6, basically oil and natural materials funds. That was around 2001, and I caught that wave. I mean, I was just trying to hedge inflation, but that was the big commodity cycle, and so. Although I had some phenomenal returns in the late 90s, did well in the 80s, probably did 12% a year in the 80s. My best year graded on a curve was the noughts, where while the equity investors were getting hit by 2 big bear markets, I compounded 13% a year. That got me on the map, actually, I think. That's when I first wrote about it. My first serious writing. I had done some anonymous blogs at Bob Moriarty's site under the pseudonym Thomas, which is my son's name. But I said, look, I'm going to get serious. So I wrote this thing called 30 Years of Investing from the Cheap Seats. It was my 30th year of investing, and I just sort of laid it out, what I think about, stuff like that. And it really got legs. And I got an email one day. I look at my email box. There's David Einhorn. I go, what? And we're now good friends. We've probably had 30 emails in the last week, to give you an idea how much we talk about fascinating topics, I should add. And so I've written that every year, and it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And I don't know if you've ever looked at one of these, but they on a bad year, they get up over 300 pages. Yep. They started out at like a dozen. And it got more and more political. I had a very prominent, I won't say his name because I like him. We spent a whole day together on my deck one day just talking about life, but very famous, a Swiss money manager. And he said, I think you've lost your edge worrying about all this other shit. And I've thought about it a lot. I think he's not being fair. I got 6% return last year, which pales in comparison to what equities did. I will take 6% in a profoundly defensive position all day long. So if I can defend against the zombie apocalypse and get 6%, I win. And so when the zombie apocalypse shows up, which I think could be this year, I always think it could be this year, right? That phrase has been true for 12 years. When it finally comes, I think we're looking at a correction that is going to be both deep and long. That's what people are going to be surprised by, the length of it. I think this thing's going to go for on and on and on and on and on. I don't think it's going to be a V-bounce. I think you really want to correct a market. You have to not only knock investors down, you have to keep knocking them down. And eventually you knock the wind out of them. So when the 81 roid rage started, 40 years of phenomenal investing starting in 81, investors had been brutalized. And that was the bottom. They really had been massacred, and they were just demoralized. And that's what forms bottoms. That's what they really look like. When the blood in the street is dried up and blown away. And so I think we're looking at one of those. I think the age of the V-bounce, the era of the V-bounce, where you drop down in a Red Bull kind of a stunt, and then within a year you're back, I think those days are over. I think inflation's going to corner us on those. Now, nominally, the markets could tread water. From 67 to 81, the markets didn't go anywhere. Inflation adjusted, you lost 75%. More importantly, you lost 14 years of your investing life. Now, you can't give up that's a third of your investing life. This is like back to your children. If I said, oh, by the way, you're going to miss 6 or 12 of your 18 years of your kids, that would kill you. Mm-hmm. And so I think time is your friend when it's a bull market. And when it's a bear market, time is your enemy. And I think, take the Nikkei, we're 35 years later.
Yeah.
We're not back to even. It's not just the depth of the fall. It's the fact that for 35 years, for about the last 5 or 6 years, the Nikkei has been making people money. But it was an uninvestable market for minimum 20 years. Minimum 20 years. Uninvestable. Just you could not possibly be in the Nikkei and make money. I was in a podcast with George Noble on Twitter Spaces. He was Peter Lynch's right-hand man. I mean, this guy's a legend, actually. And I said it was uninvestable. He said, well, you can do this. I said, no, you couldn't. Right? If you try to short the Nikkei, and it goes from 1989 to 2000 and something, just sort of trickling downhill slowly but surely down to the dregs of 6,000 from 42. You would die trying to short that because your shorting costs would burn you to a crisp. Mm-hmm. Shorting works great if it's a bungee jump, but it doesn't work well if it's stretched over decades.
Right.
And so I think the markets are going to become uninvestable. That's another way of putting it. I think they'll become uninvestable. I had a quick DM exchange with Tavi Costa, who's really good, and he knows South America well. And so I've taken a very small position in Brazilian equities, just to keep my eyes on it, just to get started thinking about the BRICS. Mm-hmm. And I still own all the gold. So even though gold went from 290 down to 270, down to 256, up to 1900, down to 1200, back to 2200, I've had it the whole way. And it's not a bad return over 20 years. I mean, there's been swaths that looked awful, but it beat the S&P since 2000. And I'm kind of bullish on platinum, on a bit of a Hail Mary. I think platinum's being undervalued. Platinum has been dead money for, 15, 20 years. The platinum miners have PEs that are like tobacco stocks. They've got strong balance sheets. Their downside, which is not trivial, is they're in South America. Not South America, South Africa. And, you could all of a sudden find yourself some Hutu or Tutsi tribe come along and say, sorry, we're taking all your assets. And that could happen. So South African stocks are pretty underpriced, but it could be for a very good reason.
So gold in my adult life, I've known it holds its value essentially against inflating currencies that live and die and inflate and deflate for 5,000 years. That's how I know the purpose of gold. It stores your value.
Well, let me give you a better metric than what's this most standard metric, right? The suit. Yeah, right. You can buy a suit all the time. Better metric, since we don't know what a toga looked like. Mm-hmm. An ounce of gold also bought you a month's worth of labor, and that has not changed in millennia. Manual labor is manual labor. And that's the metric. And so, yeah.
So when you were one of the 5 people that wanted gold, what had happened to the narrative at that point that no one thought that was going to be true anymore?
Well, so I noticed the change. I was actually doing one of my earliest podcasts with the Cornell Economics Report. I remember this vividly because they thought I was nuts. Although they were sort of in the bearish camp, but this was the brown bottom, they call it, which someone's trying to get disgusting. And gold had been pounded down and wasn't an overt attempt to keep the price of gold under control. There's memos from the 70s in which Volcker says, we should keep control of the price of gold, that sort of thing. But that was when gold was also more central to the monetary system. So you don't know what that means now. But every time gold seemed to start to get off its ass and do something, the Bank of England would announce they're going to sell it and it would fall on its ass again. And then it would start to get little legs, and the Bank of England would sell a bunch, and it would fall on its ass again. And so it seemed like it was just never going to be let up. And then one day, in 2001, I think it was, the Bank of England announced they were going to sell more gold. They're starting to run low, and they essentially emptied their treasury. And the price of gold went up. I go, what's that, right? Do you remember when China broke the tie to the dollar? So it turns out China had anchored to the dollar, and it was a straight line, right? It looked like a sheet of glass. And then one day, it just flickered. And people go, what was that?
Yeah.
It's like the person strapped up to the machine in the hospital and they're flatline. All of a sudden there's a pulse, and you go, oh, they're not dead, you know. And well, the same thing happened with gold, where the Bank of England said we're going to sell, and they did, and gold went up, not down. And then a month or two later, could be a year, I don't know. It gets pretty furry after a while. They sold, and it went up again. And so I'm at Cornell, and I said, look, something has changed in the gold market. Something has changed. The selling, the announced selling of gold is not having the same effect. And that turned out to be correct. Maybe it was something I almost bought Apple at the bottom, but I almost bought it for the wrong reason. They put the Intel chip in, and I almost went for Apple. It wasn't the Intel chip, it was the cloud that mattered. So I would have bought the right stock for the wrong reason. I didn't, unfortunately. Yeah. I turned down Bitcoin at $10 a share too, at $10 a coin. So there's that. In fact, the worst trade I ever made was I got shares of a company called LabCorp from a company I thought I understood. I'm not a great stock picker, so the delusion was probably running strong in this case. I thought I understood, and then there was a merger, and I ended up with LabCorp shares, and I said, well, I don't know what they are, so I sold them. They're up 100-fold. That would have been fun to hang on to.
Wow.
But that was probably my biggest botch. There's the guy who sold founder shares of Apple for $800 to buy beer and pizza, right? That guy's still in therapy. And if I had bought Bitcoin at 10, I'd be in therapy because I would have sold it at 50.
Right.
So I just wouldn't have hung on to it because I wouldn't have had the faith. I'm a believer. They always say don't marry an investment. I totally 100% disagree. When you get a good idea, you got to marry it. You got to believe. The guys who made 100-fold on Microsoft have one common denominator, and that is they didn't sell. And a friend of mine took Microsoft public. His name is Rick Sherwood. Hold on, I'll show you something cool. Hold on. So that's Ricky.
Oh, wow.
He's my college roommate. Call him a fraternity brother. He started Goldman Software Group before it was called Software. And I asked him one day, I said, was Microsoft always a lock? Did you know the whole way? And he said, no, not at all. He said there were at least 3 times where they could have gone to zero. So there's nothing guaranteed, right? You say, I should have known about Amazon. Well, no one thought Amazon was going anywhere, right? There was a disbelief. So the best ideas are terrifying. They really are. And so it's like getting married. Yeah. you gotta once you formulate it, you gotta say, look, just because it went down doesn't mean it's a bad idea. Yeah. And if you sell, I won't put in stop loss orders or anything. I'm a full Titanic mode. And then if the story changes, I made a mistake, then I'll sell if I find out something. But like for example, my platinum enthusiasm. These stocks have PEs of like 5. They have dividends of 8 or 9%. Yeah, they don't have to hold up for long before you've got most of your money back. I spent 2 days with a guy who's the largest shareholder of Sibanye, SBSW, and he explained to me how the platinum mining world works. And it turns out he has a house about 10 miles from our cabin in the Adirondacks, and so in the summers we get together. And they make most of their money right now off rhodium. That I did not know. But if platinum becomes a meme metal, those companies are going to go nuts. Those companies are going to go crazy. And I don't think the internal combustion engine's going anywhere. So I think that this idea that who needs platinum anymore is probably not correct.
Yeah, you had mentioned that you think the markets will become uninvestable. So I'm curious, like what would cause that? What's happening right now that
just a slow rotting?
From what?
From 15,000 down to from 5. I have the S&P fair value. Don't forget, fair value is a historical average.
Sorry, I mean from like what factors? What's going to drive the market?
Well, we're so overvalued now. Yeah. So the best metaphor I've ever heard was by Richard Russell of Dow theory fame. And he was asked, why can't the markets just go higher? He said, go into your kid's room and start stacking blocks. Just keep adding blocks. What happens? And he said, well, you end up with a stack that becomes hyper shock sensitive.
Yeah.
And it also produces a huge pile of debris when it falls. And so it's like anything in the physical sciences. If you had the similar situations in a laboratory, if you get a bunch of chemicals together that react violently, you're going to blow your lab up.
Yeah.
If you are a geologist, you get stress in California, at some point you're going to have an earthquake. And the fact that you haven't had an earthquake in a long time is not only not evidence you're not going to have one, but it's probably evidence you're about to have one.
Mm-hmm.
And what you don't want is a big one. You want a bunch of small ones. So the fact there hasn't been one, like in ski slopes, they blow off dynamite to get the avalanches to not become lethal.
Yeah.
But once the snow's built up, you're going there, okay, I don't know when that snow's going to fall, but I'm not skiing that slope today, And so I think the markets just become so top heavy and so shock sensitive. And then I have fair value, which is a historical, what the real, if it went back to average valuation in the S&P at about somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000. Now, inflation could run it up,
Yeah.
but that's not a return. That's just being faked out. You're just being diluted.
Yeah.
And I look at 25 metrics of valuation. They all point to sort of a 60+% correction to get their fair value. Whether it's Schiller PE. There's these tiny little stats that people like to just ignore. Microsoft has had a phenomenal decade run. The problem is 5-fold of that is valuation expansion.
Mm-hmm.
Just valuation.
Wow.
So their revenues are up something like 64%, and their shares are up something like 600%.
Right.
So shouldn't shares, crudely speaking, track revenues? Well, historically they have. Now, when the house of cards falls, you don't just end up with a not so bad house of cards, you end up with a big pile of shit on the floor. Mm-hmm. And so my rudimentary understanding of mathematics is to reach a historical fair value, which is an average, you have to spend statistically weighted half your time below that. Mm-hmm. So when for example, the market was a PE ratio, I hate PE ratio because accountants can fake that shit like there's no tomorrow, but let's use it. The PE of the market in 1981, which I don't think they were lying as much back then, so I think it was more valid, was 6. That means, so if you buy it, what you think is a cheap stock, if the market goes back to a PE of 6, that cheap stock's probably going to have a PE of 4. And so, half the stocks are below 6 with a PE of 6. And so they can get real cheap. Now, Michael Burry makes very astute comments. He's one of these sort of Elon Musk type, Asperger type guy. And he says, look, your default setting on an investment should be that if it goes way down, you just hold on to it. Right? That's true with bonds, right? So if you buy a bond returning 5% and the price of the bond collapses, you just hang on to it for your 5%. You didn't buy it at the right time, but you hang on to it. And would you do that with NVIDIA? No. Mm-hmm. Would you do that with Tesla? No. These companies do not have strong foundations to say, look, I will be paid for just hanging on to it. Right? NVIDIA was at one point, I don't know where it's at now, but at one point it was trading for 50 times revenues. Sun Microsystem was trading at 10 times revenues right before it did a 95% swan dive. Microsoft's 5-fold gain in valuation means if it simply returns back to the valuation of 10 years ago. And I don't remember Microsoft being on fire, burning to the ground embers 10 years ago. This is like 2013. You could say, look, it's kind of a stodgy old company. It's got its fair price. You say, it's not like the old days when it would trade at P of 50 or whatever. If it gives back just the valuation expansion, that's an 80% correction of Microsoft. If NVIDIA drops, based on its PE ratio, drops to historical fair value, let's call it 13. Call it a growth stock. Call it 20. It's got to give about 95% back. just giving back the valuations is enough to destroy lives.
How do you do the calculations though if what you're denominated in dollars are changing? Like you got the measuring stick out, and the measuring stick is changing rapidly, and they're printing money.
That's why valuation is not price. Mm-hmm. So valuation is the price of the market divided by something that the price ought to track. So if your metric is changing, then your revenues will change with it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So if the value of the dollar cuts in half, therefore your shares go up by a factor of 2 in price, your revenues will probably go up by a factor of 2 too. Although, this gets back to the panel of experts. This is what I obsess over lately. When stagflation hit in the 70s, the economists were all caught flat-footed. They didn't think stagflation was possible. And the more I thought about it, I'm going, you guys really shouldn't be paid for what you do. You're not really worth much because, and this is how I think about it. You all of a sudden find yourself in a situation where the amount of dollars you're paid buys less. Mm-hmm. How is that not stagnating?
Yeah.
It has to stagnate, right? And I remember all the guys who would say, I hope we have inflation because that'll get me out of this whole mortgage problem I have, right? And I go, how's your mortgage payments doing these days? They any cheaper? Is life any better? I don't see guys on Twitter anymore talking about how great it is that inflation's making their mortgage payment any easier. They do know this is making paying every other bill in their entire life harder.
Right.
So there are people who thought inflation was good news.
Yeah.
If you think inflation is good news, you are delusional or you own great inflation hedges.
Yep. That's part of everything these days. Is like I posted a tweet about this that it's like we're in the era of just fakeness, essentially, because inflation is good is a sort of a fake thing. Our free markets are fake. The fact checking on the internet is fake. There are fake genders.
So Adam Taggart it's so rare that I hear someone analyze the market. I'm looking for something, and since it's a battle of Chrome versus Adam Taggart had a guest on the other day who talked in real valuation metrics. And she was talking 50, 60% sort of correction, and she was very lucid. And the irony is I went to look up on Twitter, she had blocked me. I'm going, you're my soulmate. Why would you do that to me? I'm going, well, she probably saw that I supported Trump or something and couldn't take it. Couldn't take the pain. But she was one of the very, Stephanie Pomboy, Jesse Felder understands this. I'm sure Grant Williams understands this. I met Grant. This gets back to how do I get here. I cold called Grant on an email. I sent him something. I said, you might be interested in this. And, we've been friends ever since. I one time drove to New York because he was going to be there, and we spent the day together in New York. And what's it called? Thoughtful Money. People should go to this podcast of Taggart's. It was about a week ago. And she talks about valuations in terms that make total friggin' sense. And her name is Danielle Park. I couldn't have said it any better. So valuation metrics are always things that should track it. So price to GDP. There are people who make arguments why GDP is changing. I would make the counter argument, say, by the way, GDP is being counted poorly now, so price to GDP, the price should actually be shrinking because the GDP is getting to be a suckier number. Here's a great example of what's not GDP. As the boomers get older, we're going to spend a fortune on healthcare. A fortune.
Yeah.
It is very hard to argue that's GDP because what you're really doing is measuring the costs of keeping an exceedingly depreciating asset on the road. It's like you have a Corvair and you're putting repair work into it week after week after week. The boomers are now going to start becoming a massive drag on society with all their health. That's not GDP. We would be much better if there were no healthcare costs and we were all just healthy.
Right.
And so GDP is when you mow, they assume you mow your lawn, they assume you pay yourself, and they count that towards GDP. I mean, they put just unbelievable bullshit into the GDP. Then, of course, the inflation numbers. What's the inflation reported now? Like 3.5% or something?
Yeah.
Nobody thinks it's 3.5%.
No.
You couldn't possibly think that and not be an economist.
Right.
Economists can do that.
Right.
And so Jimmy Iorio said his restaurant costs in 2 years have gone up 40%.
Yeah, that sounds more right over the last few years.
Right. The Chapwood index looks at 500 prices in each of 10 major cities in the United States. So it's a very simple old school inflation metric, kind of like John Williams, but John Williams was kind of demonized, so Chapwood's a little bit less scarred. And they have inflation running in the double digits. It's been there a while too.
Yeah.
Ron Grice of the Chart Store, he plotted the S&P as a function, corrected not for inflation in the usual sense, but corrected for the M2 money supply.
Yeah.
Seems like a very clean inflation metric to me, right? I mean, M2 money supply, I think, is a highly measurable thing. And when you plot 100 years of the S&P corrected for the M2 money supply, it turns out over the last 100 years, the markets go down. And so if Ron's charts are correct, and they go down gently, so they don't go down much, but they don't go up. And then he said, if you're getting guff on Twitter, here's another version of that. Because I show this plot and then I say, is it possible that all of your returns are dividends? And it turns out there's a lot of confirming data to support that. So for example, Buffett and Graham and Dodd, and then Buffett's editions of The Intelligent Investor. First of all, and I always thought this had to be true, and finally someone said it, bonds and stocks return the same. They return them different time dependencies. So you can always find some big wide period where stocks do better than bonds, but over 200 years they don't. And actually the term they used about people who think stocks return more than bonds, they use the term delusional. And it never made sense to me because they said the markets would arbitrage away that difference. Mm-hmm. Stocks would be bid up by the wisdom of crowds. They'd be bid up. And so it never made sense that stocks always return more because then people would always just buy stocks.
Right.
And so it turns out Buffett also said in his Fortune article in 1999, the most you can hope to get after all the fees and everything is 4% a year, real return. And most people are thinking, oh, no, that can't be. It's like, well, if you're planning for retirement, hey, boomer, you're in trouble if you think you're going to get 8%. Now, especially, he wasn't even talking about valuations then. He was just talking about sort of generic investing. From these valuations, that 4% becomes zero over a very long time from these lofty levels. Yeah. So then you look back, and so what Ron did was he sent me a chart that showed the total return corrected for M2, and that includes the dividends. About 3.79% annualized over 100 years. That's awfully close to 4%.
Right.
And so you go, well, there it is again. Now, the way you know the market's overvalued is back at the start of the period, dividends were as high as 6%. Now they're 1.5%. That's threefold, fourfold overvalued.
Yeah.
That's a 75% correction to get to fair value, to get back.
So basically, over 100 years, all of the growth in the stock market has been just money printing, minus some small amount of actual real things getting better.
Well, the entire growth is money printing, and the entire gain is dividends. So the guys who don't worry about getting dividends, I'm not a big fan of share buybacks. They got their legs back in the 70s, early 80s when Peter Lynch wrote a bunch of books. Bill Gross used to criticize Lynch. He said he left on a high. He didn't show us what he could do in a tough time. But he said a company that's buying back its shares knows from inside information that those shares are cheap. Those shares are cheap. But then two things happened. One is that idea became generally known. And second is that laws were passed that changed the tax structure that made compensation of CEOs and C-suite guys in cash really undesirable. Mm-hmm. And so they invented the options compensation. And then they weren't getting taxed, they weren't getting expensed, and so it was a real scam. And so all of a sudden you got CEOs were getting this much salary and this many stock options. And so they were buying back shares basically to sop up all those extra shares that had been released so that the actual total number of shares was not soaring. And second of all, they started buying back shares that were expensive. And I have a benign interpretation of that, and that is a company has a balance sheet, right? A fortress balance sheet. Apple used to. They've burned it down. They're now $50 billion in debt. Mm. They were at like $200 billion balance sheet. Now, you won't remember this, but in the 70s, if you were compensated for something, it took a long time, because if they sat on, let's say $1,000, if they sat on your $1,000 for a month, at the end of the month, there'd be $1,100 in their bank because they were getting huge interest. Mm-hmm. So paying people back, paying your bills was not profitable. Hanging onto the money in that money market account was profitable. So one could argue that a share buyback is taking a balance sheet for which you can't get a return because interest rates had gone to the basement, and trying to find a better return. And you say, well, I know my PE is 35. That means it's essentially a 3% returning price, but I can only get 2% in the treasury market. So you could kind of make an argument that the low interest rates drove share buybacks, and it allowed you to borrow money to buy shares, which is really stupid. You can say, no, it's smart because, right up until interest rates rise, and then your company's bankrupt and you're squealing like a little bitch to get a bailout. And it pumped the CEO compensation, the C-suite compensation. So the guys who defend share buybacks is a tax-friendly way to return capital. I go, okay, so they bought back shares. Buy a pizza with that return compensation. Go ahead, try to buy a pizza with that. You know who's buying the pizza? The guys who sold the shares during the buyback. Those are the guys who got the money.
This brings me to something you said recently, which I found fascinating. But if we're way overvalued right now, and then there's this coming transfer of wealth from boomers who have a lot of paper wealth, right?
Right.
How does that transfer happen to the millennials or their kids? How do you see that going down?
Well, I don't really know. This is a complicated story, as I'm sure you're sensing. And there's sort of two limiting cases I like to look at. One is they sell everything, and then the money that they get goes to their kids, right? That's kind of how a lot of estate settlements work. They just liquidate the estate, have a tag sale, sell the house, fight over the proceeds, cause family battles and rifts and things like that. And the problem with that model is who's going to buy it? The kids who are right now broke. Yeah. So you're going to sell it to the generation that somehow is hoping to get the money from those sales. And so there's a sort of paradoxical situation where the buyers of the wealth are the ones who are supposed to be getting the wealth. Then you can go to the other limiting case and say, well, let's imagine you don't sell it. Let's imagine you just transfer it so my kids inherit my house, it's a pretty nice house, actually. I decided to invest in real estate. We live on a lake, 100-foot cliff, looking west. Utopian existence. 3 times as much house as I needed, but I did the math. No low interest rates. Why bother to, hang on the cash? I'm willing to tie up that quantity of money to live like a king. We're much happier for it.
Yep.
My kids can't afford my house.
Right.
So they'd have to sell it. Well, who's going to buy it? Now we're back to they gotta liquidate it to get to it.
Right.
Now, in theory, they could inherit, my gold. My gold's off radar, so they can get that.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally off radar. I had a standing offer with a gold dealer to just buy every ounce that came through his shop.
Yeah.
And I did that for years. And so it's a paradoxical situation because at the current price, the next generation can't afford it.
So it's not there. The wealth isn't actually
So it's
there.
not a real price.
Yeah.
And this woman I was trying to tell you about, Danielle Park,
Mm-hmm.
she talks about that. She says it's no longer investing. Everything's a bet.
Yeah, right.
And someone gave me some shit about fair value. Says, well, you can't put fair value. Oh, yeah, you can. There's a historical value. And if you want to say that's not right, they say, look, the higher the valuation you're willing to tolerate, the lower the return you're going to get. If you pay 100 times profits, you get a 1% return. Have a ball. Buy something for 100 times profits. Be my guest. It's like buying a farm for $1 million. It gives you $100,000 that gives you $10,000 in profit. Yeah. And a farm that does never harvest anything, that's like a company that doesn't pay dividends. Sort of. Yeah. Sort of. You do want to harvest your crop. Yeah. And so it's a paradoxical situation. And the fact that everything's a bet. Listen to the language of analysis. And when they use a word, say, is that investing or is that sentiment? Is that trading? Mm-hmm. Everything is sentiment. The Fed's going to do this, right? That's not investing. Investors don't worry about what the Fed's going to do. Buffett never gave a shit what the Fed was going to do, except he was a bit of a stock jobber behind the scenes. He wanted to look like that little old mafia don walking around the street in a bathrobe. He was much slicker than that. But it's not investing. And some say, well, what about the gold silver ratio? And I said, there's no revenue stream associated with it, so those are all bets. Buying gold, buying silver is just a bet.
Yeah.
And there's no fixed price. There's no revenue to compare it. Now, if you take company A that has a revenue that has a 10% return on the investment, and the other has a 5%, I can compare those two. Then you have to factor in growth and stuff like that, which this is the part that not being an accountant doesn't help. So I try to get sectors right. I try to get big moves right. I try to figure out a flyer I took. Well, for a couple of years, I owned RSX, which was the Russian mutual fund. It was dirt cheap, and I thought I was nuts. Then one day, Grant Williams said, if you want to be contrarian, RSX with all those oil companies with PEs of 4 are not crazy. This is a contrary play. And then the drums of war started up, and RSX went down the drain. Mm-hmm. But 2 days before they closed it up, I took a flyer on it. I said, okay, this is going to go to 0, or it's going to get a lot back. So I bought a small amount. It was bragging rights, right? The day they swallowed it, I don't even know if I lost money that day. That's how small that was. And I won't get it back. If they start trading RSX, I'm sure JP Morgan will find a way to get my assets away from me before it trades.
Yeah.
So someone will find a way to make my shares worthless.
Right.
It probably won't be the Russians.
Right.
Which, by the way, I'm a pro-Putin guy. So if you read my writing, I think you'd understand. If you just hear casually what I think, you'll just call me a commie dog. But I'm a Reagan Republican commie dog.
Right. So what do you think Putin is? In what way are you a Putin guy? What does that mean?
Well, first of all, I did a poll on Twitter. I love Twitter polls. I now have enough followers to make them meaningful. I listed 4 leaders. I'm trying to remember which ones, but it included Biden, Putin, Trudeau, and one other. And I said, which leader most cares about the country that they're leading? And Putin got 71% of the votes.
Right.
So Putin is a nationalist. Who's the other nationalist? Who's the other really prominent nationalist that we hear about every day? Trump. Yep. So it seems a little odd to me that the two guys who are getting grenades hurled at them every day, day after day, are the two nationalists of two superpowers. And then another one who's getting a lot of guff. I'm a big Viktor Orban fan. If Viktor Orban ran for president of the United States, I'd give him his whole birth certificate fakery and vote for him. And so I think they're trying to take out the nationalists. And this, therefore, says what we're seeing is globalism. We're seeing guys who are trying to take over the global geopolitical system. Mm-hmm. And how, this is way, way over my pay grade, but everything I look at says someone is attempting to destroy borders, someone's attempting to destroy the idea of sovereign states, and someone's attempting to take out all the people who are resisting that. So Trudeau, for example, they love because he's such a nitwit, such a complete, whiny bitch. Yeah. Whereas Trump is a great risk to them. The people who hate Trump are missing the fact that I really sincerely believe that he cares about America. And he's idiosyncratic. I have no trouble with all the people who hate him. I go, yeah, of course, he's, there's certain aspects of him that are just weird.
Yeah.
But I have no evidence that Biden cares. Mm-hmm. I have no evidence Obama cares. I think Obama was a totally satisfactory leader. I mean, the fact that he was so good at the microphone was enough.
Right.
And I hated Bush Jr. I didn't like Bush Jr. He got us into, we've killed 4.5 million people in the Middle East. How is that not a Holocaust?
Yeah.
Where are these lefty pinko, victim industrial complex guys when we're bombing Yemen and when we're trying to pick fake fights with Syria? And when we take out Libya because it's getting too stable, and in Obama, the liberal Democrat, bombed 7 Muslim countries. Which of those 7 Muslim countries attacked us? Well, we suppose we got attacked by someone in Jordan, a couple days ago, right? Mm-hmm. Three servicemen. If you're a U.S. serviceman in Jordan, there's a chance you're going to get killed. Tough luck. If we're going to put U.S. servicemen in Georgia, we can't get pissed off when one of them gets killed. Mm-hmm. That's like when Khashoggi went to the Saudi embassy. He got killed. And I know why. He was a CIA operative who helped try to do a coup on Mohammed bin Salman. So Mohammed bin Salman sliced him up and fed him to the camels and photographed it. And then showed his other royal family members, said, this is what will happen to you if you try to do it to me. That's what Khashoggi was about. So there's all this shit going on. The Democrats look like they can't possibly make worse decisions. I could have voted for Bernie. Trump versus Bernie would have been a real tricky call for me. Nothing to do with politics. I just said Bernie has been trying to. Bernie has done what he believed to be good for his entire career. Now he might be a skank now. I don't know, but I thought he was consistent. I was sure we'd neuter the shit out of him. I was sure he'd never be able to pull off any of the crap that a socialist would pull off. So Bernie didn't bother me. Hillary scared the crap out of me. Mm-hmm. Hillary's a head of a crime family.
Yeah.
And so I didn't like McCain. For a guy who spent 5 years in a POW camp, he sure liked to get into wars. It just doesn't make sense to me. I can't. I thought we had clean wars. The more history I've read, the more I'm convinced that none of our entries to any of the wars were legit. Mm-hmm. And some of you say, well, I kind of understand, but some not at all. And Ukraine is a disaster. I mean, there's 500,000 dead Ukrainians, a totally destroyed country in a war that could have been completely avoided if NATO had been willing to avoid it. Mm-hmm. So Putin, it's not Putin's fault, in my opinion. Putin played the best hand he could play given the circumstances. And people are listening, so they're going to be appalled by it. And I go, you're ignorant of what happened over the previous 10 years before the war. And all the things that were happening in Ukraine and all the ethnic Russians were being slaughtered by the Nazis, literal Nazis in Ukraine. They were funded by the CIA. and how many times Putin said, look, you can't have Ukraine. He wasn't trying to take Ukraine. He's trying to prevent us from taking Ukraine. Mm. And he said, look, Ukraine's existential for us. You can't have it. And we said, fuck you. George Kennan, great Cold Warrior. I don't know about great as in good person, but famous Cold Warrior. Mm. When we moved NATO east in 97, he said, this is the biggest foreign policy disaster in history. And now everyone's, Nikki Haley, Victoria Hutt Newland, Chrystia Freeland, they're all just psychotic. And they think they're living in a different era, in my opinion. They're going to find out that if we pick a war with, and you see Lindsey Graham the other day said, we got to hit Iran, we got to hit them hard. Mm-hmm. And what did he say before? Oh, when Russians are dying, that's always good. That's money well spent. Lindsey, would you please have a massive heart attack for us? Just do us a biggie. Go to the light. The gene pool needs a scrubbing, and you're it. Of course, he's never going to pass his genes on, of course. And so we have some very bad people running our country. I want to be the good guys. I don't think we are. And this is not anti-American. Right. This is anti-authoritarianism.
Why do you think...
January 5th.
Go ahead.
Right.
Why do you think things are getting crazier, trying to get more authoritarian? The leaders are getting worse or worse options. Like what's causing all that? I mean, we've talked about money printing for 100 years, like sort of glossing over. Do you think it's all the system of money we have that's driving us here, or what do you think it is?
No. When I do podcasts with guys like Marty Benn, guys like that, they go to that. Rudy Havasine goes to that, and it certainly doesn't help. Centuries ago when the president of France decided he wanted to take over Spain, it's like, is France not big enough for you? What are you doing, right? Is there not enough wenches in France for you? And so humans have been doing this since the dawn of civilization. And so we're just doing it again. But so the globalists appear, and I don't know who they are. I'm in a doctor Zoom group, and there's an NSA guy in there. And he says, I don't like to name names. Profound comment he made. He says, I don't like to, we're talking about a they. I said, Stephen, who are they? Who's the they in this conversation we're having? He says, well, I don't like to name names because then it gets you to stop thinking. So if we say, we got the vaccine because of Bill Gates, right? Bill Gates is the problem, or Tony Fauci is the problem. Then you get to say, okay, we solved that. What's for dinner? Let's move on. And so I've learned what you should be very careful about is drawing conclusions that cause you to then stop thinking. And so if you say Kamala Harris is a moron, I think we can all shake hands on that one. I know someone who knows her and said there's stupid and then there's Kamala. I mean, she's just dumb. But there's a reason why she's there, and there's a reason why her speechwriters are writing her speeches that make her look like a moron. So calling her a moron to the extent it gets you to just dismiss her is the mistake. And Biden's demented, and you go, then why is he on the ticket? Mm-hmm. Why is the Democratic Party going with Biden right now? What my brother told me, he said, Megyn Kelly says inside information, going to slip Michelle in. Now, everyone's talking about that, but Megyn claims to say that it is now in gear. And I got told that by someone who knows Michelle. And he said she doesn't want a campaign, she just wants the job. And so they're going to slip her in late enough that she doesn't have to kiss babies.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
She could actually win legitimately. They wouldn't even necessarily have to rig the election this time.
So you think no chance Biden is trotted out again?
Oh, I wouldn't say no chance, because the Democrats have done such horrifically bad decision making that leaving Biden in there is well within their skill set. I'm pissed off at him because, if both parties took as their responsibility putting up a credible world leader, I wouldn't care who got elected. Mm-hmm. I can live with someone who politically leans the other direction. What I can't live with is some guy who let me describe a hypothetical candidate, who appears to be a pedophile, demented, selling us to foreign countries repeatedly, whose son's a crackhead, and can't put together a coherent sentence. Out of 350 million people, that's who you choose to run for president.
Yeah.
So if you're a DNC person, you're listening to this, it's your fault. And I understand why you don't want to vote for Trump. I for years have said, look, if you don't like either choice, vote third party. Mm-hmm. The vote counts as much as if you vote for one of the two parties. Because I'm in New York, if I vote for either party, it doesn't matter. It matters more if I vote for a third party, because if, let's say, you want to vote Bobby Kennedy, those numbers will show up, even though he didn't win.
Yep.
The parties will look and say, holy shit, there's a big lot of voters we are missing. What do we have to do to get them? And I would say, well, stop lying, right? Let's go with that. Give us a candidate who's not retarded. Let's go with that, right? And we have to make them pay for their sins. And they're not right now. I want Trump to win. I really want him to win. I want to do the experiment. Mm-hmm. I want to see what happens. I was agnostic, thinking, God, it's going to be exhausting, right? We put up with a lot of guff with him in the presidency. Not necessarily his fault, right? But the attacks against him would just be so relentless and painful, and we see it every day, and we'd be watching scandals that are fake and scandals that are real, and you just wouldn't. It would just be nonstop.
Right.
And but now I want him to do it. Day one, free everyone out of the prisons from January 6th. Mm-hmm. Day two, mixed emotions, go after your enemies. I would love to see him make a couple people pay. Revenge is a dish best served cold. It's not good. It's not necessarily the best outcome.
Yeah, isn't
my son said to me the other day, there's a difference between justice and revenge. We're talking about someone whose daughter, I don't have a daughter, so this is hypothetical. I'll ask you, your daughter's, let's say she's 12 years old, 14 years old. She shows up home. This is possible. She shows up home and she's got a double mastectomy and has been given gender blockers. What would you do to that doctor?
I would kill.
You should
kill
not
that
answer
doctor.
the question. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right. So, and here's what I think gender-bending doctors should think about. When you do that to some teenager without the parents' permission, which I don't think the parents should be able to permit that. Mm-hmm. We don't let them tie them up in the basement and beat them either. We step in on that too. But if you're a doctor who's doing sex changes on kids without the parents knowing it, I think you should be aware that you're taking your life in your hands. And I can't be alone.
No.
I don't know what I do. You don't know until you face it. What I do know is that right now, rational, non-high blood pressure Dave says whacking the guy wouldn't be crazy. Mm-hmm. And if a couple of gender-bending doctors who did that without parental permission got whacked, I bet it would slow down.
Yeah.
So, we dropped guys on Omaha Beach. We lost thousands for a cause. That would be a cause. And I don't know why it doesn't happen. I don't know why dads don't lose their minds.
Yeah.
I've always wondered why divorce lawyers can survive. They got to be taking their lives at risk too, right. And that's normal stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I think if you were a doctor and you were in the gender industrial complex, I think you're evil. I have no trouble with someone who's an adult. What's an adult? Well, you could argue 18. You could argue 25. That's when the frontal cortex is finished developing. I feel really bad for someone who actually thinks they're in the wrong body. I mean, I think it's hard enough being a teenager without that. Being a generic, I hate to say normal, a generic teenager is not that pretty.
Yeah.
You'll find out soon enough. That would be awful to go through that. So I'm really sympathetic to those kids. I'm militant against, biological males competing in women's sports. Mm-hmm. I had a DM exchange this morning with a guy who's actually funding Riley Gaines security detail. This is a small world we live in. And I did a poll on Twitter. I said no waffling, no ifs, ands, or buts. Should biological men be able to compete in women's sports? Yes or no? Yes, no. 97.6% no.
Yeah.
This is not a debated topic, except somehow it's sticking.
But it's not going to, I don't think. It's so far out there. And
yeah, I think this one will die.
That you're offending everybody doing that. I mean, that's
I wish I had good numbers, but I think so I saw there's a guy named Billboard Chris who's been fighting this, and he sounds like a petty guy, but when you listen to his podcast, when you listen to his interviews, he's very knowledgeable. And he says when they've tracked, and this is what they don't do, they don't follow up because they know they'd get slaughtered if they had the numbers. He says if you track people who go transgender, but without the interventions, but just say, look, I'm a chick, I'm a dude, whatever, you make the declaration. He said something like 3 years later, something like 82% of them have flipped back.
Oh, wow.
Now, of those 82%, apparently only 65% of them end up just being gay. The other 35 end up being hetero or are living the life of a hetero. Mm-hmm. I've never known. I think there are people who are sufficiently sort of in the gray zone of sexuality. I think there are some who can decide how they want to live it. I think there's some it's like just flat out I'm gay. Nothing's going to go different. Yeah. I have a son who could go both ways. He's gay, but he could go both ways, I think. But I think there's some who can't. I mean, I think they're just they have I don't know if it's a gay gene or not, but they or some epigenetic thing or whatever. That's okay. But you do not want to corral those guys in, convince them they actually have a gender problem, and then chemically castrate them and cut off their breasts and things like that. Not when they're 14 years old. And there's people who say, oh, that happens so rarely. And I said, once is too many. Mm-hmm. And here's what's going to stop it. This is clever. They have a statute of limitations right now on lawsuits. It's something like 1 or 2 years. Now, in that world, you can keep a person convinced they're on the right track for a year or two. They're pushing the statute of limitations out something like 10 or 15 or 20 years. Mm. And the gender clinics realize they're going to be legally exposed for decades. And they're shutting them down. That's what's going to end it. The fact that there are gender transition clinics all over the United States now is rather astonishing. When this first showed up in Northern Europe decades ago, there were all these safeguards, all these checkpoints where you said, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. Now it's pretty much, our Zoom call, boom, you're good to go. Yeah. I'm not sure it's always that way, but I think there are places where it's that way.
Why do you think this is being pushed? I don't get why people want this to happen. Why do whoever they are.
They, right. I've several theories. One is if you wanted to destroy the United States of America, you're not going to do it by pulling battleships up to the shore.
Right.
You're going to do it by getting us to destroy ourselves. And so you're going to be George Soros funding local district attorneys and stuff like that. And you're going to do stuff like Daniel Penny, saving a bunch of people in a subway and then getting charged with manslaughter. The prosecutor, I'd happily find some way to send that bastard to jail. Because the message there is clear: never help somebody. Mm-hmm. Never intervene. Daniel Penny's a hero. He killed a guy. He's a hero. Even if he intended to, he's a hero. The guy had been arrested 44 times. He threatened to kill everyone. Daniel Penny's a hero. If he'd pulled out a gun and blown the guy's brains out, he's a hero.
So it's just.
But they're going to charge him with manslaughter. And I watched it. He didn't try to kill them. He didn't know he was killing them. He didn't choke him for 15 minutes. He choked him for 90 seconds. As soon as the guy stopped struggling, he let up. And now they're charging him with manslaughter. The black guy who helped him, who also said, look, we got this under control. They're working as a team. They didn't even charge him. And then about 3 weeks later said, oh, this is getting embarrassing. So they charged him and then they dropped the charges. This is just racism. This is racism. This is raw racism. This is fuck you racism. This is, I'll someone wants, I do these podcasts. I can imagine someone watched this and wanted to take me to task. I'm ready on every one of these topics. Let's go to war, you son of a bitch.
So you think
I will.
You think all of this is just
I think it's to destroy the United
intentionally
States.
tearing the social fabric in a way like that?
Yeah, that's the only thing that makes sense.
And then,
which led me down a rabbit hole that's so deep, and I'm writing about it. I don't know if I'll ever publish it, but I'm going to finish writing about it. And that is, what's the mechanism? And I'm not convinced I'm right, but I'm following up on the idea that there's a gigantic global pedophilia network that is controlling geopolitics, way beyond Epstein. We know Epstein did this. We know Roy Cohn used to do this. We know sexual blackmail is common in politics. I think it's much bigger than that. I'm not positive. But when you dig, you find incredibly bad stuff. And what I like to say to people is, look, here's the deal. If you actually read official statistics from the National or the International Center for Missing and Abused Children, or UNICEF, or the FBI or the CIA or whatever, the numbers are all over the place, but between 1 and 10 million kids a year are disappearing. So say, okay, that seems to be the foundation of what the hell's going on. If you accept that the numbers are huge, forget about if they're exact. You accept the numbers are huge. It's not 10, it's not 15, it's not 1,000. And you don't know where they're going. Some are disappearing, some are becoming just, street kids, things like that. Some are being used to mine cobalt so that you can pat yourself on the back for driving a Prius. But there's a ton who are disappearing. Where are they going? They're not going to trailer parks where the archetypical pedophile who's ring-fenced from the elementary school, who's on some registry. That's not where they're going. Kids are too expensive. Those guys might be trying to get kids, but they're soloists. This is some global pedophilia ring of an extra. And then you read about, stings where they save 60 kids. 60 out of 1 million? And then the question I ask is, okay, so you see something about traffickers, like, Sounds of Freedom. You see the traffickers, they're archetypical traffickers. There's some Banana Republic mean bastard who's an evil person. What you never see is the guys who are paying. These are not poor, wretched people who look like they have IQs of 80. That's John Wayne Gacy types. These are guys in positions of power. And if you watch interviews of survivors of these networks and stuff, who've somehow pulled away and somehow pieced their lives back together and reassociated their multiple personalities and all the things that go wrong when you're 5 years old and some guys are assaulting you and torturing you and doing things like that. They all tell the same story. They all have very similar experiences. And so it turns out the overlap between, between pedophilia networks and Satanism is huge. Big Venn diagram. And it's overt. It's out there. You can find this stuff. I mean, Disney has a big problem. Disney, the corporation, has a big problem. Hollywood has a huge problem. Politicians, so these victims talk about being, so when you're in this network, you oftentimes have like some powerful person who who kind of had control of you more than everyone else. And they talk about two-time Prime Minister of Belgium, Prime Minister of Australia, senators, governors, famous people, George Bush, Gerald Ford, famous Hollywood actors. And it's so outlandish that if you haven't sort of worked your way through these rabbit holes and come to the conclusion the world's more screwed up than I ever thought, right? So if you're still working on was the vaccine a good idea, you're not ready for this world. But if you ask where 1 million kids goes, you got to come up with a pretty fucked up model to answer that question.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it's harvesting, not just organs, blood. I think the adrenochrome story is real. Not that adrenochrome does it. I think there's people who want the transfusion, though. I think the Satanism is real. If you'd asked me 3 months ago who's the most famous Satanist in the world, I would have, without hesitation, given you an answer. It would have been Marina Abramovic. She's Croatian. She knows powerful, with pictures of her with Hillary, pictures of her with Hollywood elites, and holding goats' heads and serving at these dinner parties with food that's made to look like a cadaver. I'm praying it's made to look like a cadaver. They sure as hell look like cadavers. In fact, one of them has a bullet in the forehead. So, God damn, that might be a cadaver.
How do you know, though? This is the problem with the internet. Like, how do you know what's real, what's an AI generated
this woman's images? Out of the closet. This woman's out of the closet. But this woman's proud.
On all this stuff, the mainstream media doesn't want any of this, and then you can only get it on these crazy places. But then how do you even know if those are real?
You don't.
Yeah.
You don't. What you do is you try to fact check. You look for inconsistencies. You for example, I checked one out. I check a bunch out, but there's one, like, for example, Disney has a movie called Praise Petey. Let me see if I can do this. You got your internet up?
Yeah.
You listening along, search Praise Petey trailer. Right? And what you will find is that Disney has a movie about a girl who inherits a blood-drinking, lethal Satanist cult. She inherits it from her father. And you can actually find pictures of these guys standing around a table with their robe tied. This is fucking Disney.
Man.
And it turns out if you go through Disney's cartoons, there's all this unbelievably satanic and pedophilic symbolism embedded in the graphics. It's not just artists having fun. You want to watch something surreal. Look at the 2012 Olympic ceremony. And I'm trying to remember where it was. Was it Athens, 2012 Olympic?
London was 12.
London. Ceremony, London. There you go. My third link shows it. Mm-hmm. The entire theme is demons. And there are these demons running around the infield of this big stadium. And they're harassing kids in pajamas in bed. I mean, it's just, you look and you go, who thought that was, that's not exactly having, Ice Cube or something in the halftime ceremonies, right? This is crazy stuff. Yeah. And the third link that came up for me, COVID-19 NHS Olympic 2012-2020 ceremonial ritual. I don't know what that's all about, but if you watch it, you'll say that's the creepiest halftime ceremony I can imagine. Now you go, well, why would they do that? Well, here's the funny thing. I think I'm picking up. So let's say you accept this whole thing as just true and wacky, that there really is satanic people, and I don't know why they do it. But I think I'm picking up the fact that you're supposed to be open about it. That's part of the shtick. And so this symbol, for example, when you see someone, I watched, I think it was John Lennon got on the stage, he did it to the audience, and then some guy was in Congress and he gave a speech, he had his hand in his pocket, pulls his hand out, does that, puts his hand back in his pocket, picks up his speech again, sees people behind other people at the podium doing that to the camera. That supposedly is an Illuminati sign. I don't go in deep into the Illuminati stuff because it goes back centuries and it gets just so creepy it doesn't get me anywhere. I'm trying to stay on the where do the kids go. So I'm on a Zoom call with a former Department of Defense caseworker. He's an intelligence guy. Crudely speaking, you call him CIA, but he's DOD. He was in Afghanistan. He's been doing it his whole life. I was Googling him while he was talking on the Zoom call I'm on. And I'm checking, but he's right. He's a lieutenant colonel, but he says, he opens up and says, I'm not really, that's just what they assigned me as. That's a sort of a front. I was never a lieutenant colonel, but that when I go on TV, I wear lieutenant colonel garb and shit like that. And he was very, very straightforward. He talked about all the goddamn guys he was dealing with, all the Rumsfeld, all these guys through the years. And I was checking him, and they're a very prominent guy. And I get to the end, and he seemed very honest and disgusted by it all. And I get to the end of the shit, and I said, okay, his name is Tony Schaeffer, Shaffer, for those who want to check. I get to the end of the Zoom call, which is also online, it turns out. And I said, Tony, okay, I'm interested in the topic. I'm interested in the role of global pedophilia networks and their influence on geopolitics. Because if you want to run the world, if you want to give I don't think they corrupt people in power. I think they corrupt people and then give them power. If you're not corrupted, you don't get the power. I think it's that simple. So that's what sort of Skull and Bones is all about. They actually corrupt you first, and then you become a member of the club. I think there's like Hollywood guys who actually do horrid things on film, and then they're given the parts that they weren't getting before. I think it's really that kind of crazy. So, but I could be wrong. This is my intellectual power of pulling apart complex problems. Your sources are never great. But I've watched so much stuff. I've read so much stuff, and I'm trying to piece together the story. And so I asked Tony Schaeffer. I said, I'm interested in that. And he starts talking about Epstein. I go, no, I'm not interested in Epstein. We all know that Epstein had probably 1,000 clients. They're all powerful. They all did bad stuff. We all accept it. We also know we're not going to get any detail because they whack people who do. And I said, no. I said, okay, let me ask you a simple question. I said, is the Clinton Foundation child trafficking? And he said, absolutely. Now, I had known that, except for, as you suggest, how do you know? Mm-hmm. How do I know Tony's not lying to me, right? But the Clinton Foundation, the fingerprints of that group is everywhere. Haiti, 2-time caught child trafficker in Haiti. She's in a Haitian jail for getting caught the second time. During crises around the world, the kids get scooped up. No one notices. They never reappear. That's called harvest season. So when there's a problem in Haiti, for example, you scoop up all the kids, off they go. It's like World War II London, except those kids came back after the war, right? Those are the good guys. Well, now they harvest them. Ukraine is a hub of child trafficking. Now, I have a theory as to why that would be. Besides the fact that Ukraine's half first world, half third world, right? It's kind of ambiguous. The other thing about Ukraine is that unlike going to Haiti or Africa or whatever, some trafficker was being interviewed, and they said, what about grabbing kids off the street in the U.S.? He said, no, it's not worth the effort. First it happens, the entire community gathers around, everyone's trying to find the kid. It's way not worth that much trouble, way too risky, not a good play. And this guy's voice is dubbed over and stuff, so you don't know who he is. He says, much easier to just go to another country where no one will notice. And so Ukraine not only has got that third world flavor, but it's got blonde-haired, blue-eyed kids.
Oh, boy.
My theory is that those kids probably are the most expensive. I'm guessing a kid from Haiti does not bring the price that a kid from Ukraine brings.
Oof. All right, Dave, you broke me. We're too deep.
We are deep.
You broke me.
And I might be wrong, and I'm not sure I'm ever going to write. I'm going to write about it, but I'm not sure I'm ever going to publish it. Because, but I can show you hour-long videotapes of Hollywood producers talking about the amount of pedophilia in Hollywood. Well-known producers. One of them named Cappy. Cappy called out a very famous actor. He says, let me just tell you, so-and-so is a pedophile. The most famous. Name the biggest box office hit of the last 20 years. Male actor, the biggest draw. I'll tell you who Cappy did. Tom Hanks.
Oh, boy.
And I dug into it. You can't destroy the case. There's some weird shit out there. And I'm praying it's not true because it's like, Tom, but then don't forget Bill Cosby. We thought Bill Cosby was the best of the best. And then I started replaying the tape and said, okay, his son got shot. Remember that? His son got shot? Senseless killing? You sure it was a senseless killing? Gotta wonder. So in any event, these Hollywood producers, Cappy called him out. 2 weeks later, falls off a bridge, gets hit by a car on the way down.
Oh, man.
Guy named John Paul Rice, I think. He spends an hour talking about Hollywood in language that's every bit as batshit crazy as what I just delivered to you. And he's like, I think he's the producer for Guardians of the Galaxy, and these are not unknown people.
Yeah.
And so it strikes me as possible. This is when I'm digging in. My wife says, why are you doing this? I said, because it might be what's causing the world to be so fucked up. It might actually be the cause. I also think the other problem is when the internet showed up, the game changed so much. Before they could hide shit, now they can't. And so they've gone to a whole nother tactic of just blowing our circuits with it. If you read about authoritarianism, two things about people who are in an authoritarian state that stand out. One is demoralization. And the second is confusion. They don't know what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And read Michael Malice's book, The White Pill, about the history of the Soviet Union. It's phenomenal. Because he doesn't get tangled up in the Russianness of it. Right? You could imagine just being Ruski, I'm lost.
Yeah.
No. 40 million people died. Michael Malice explains how. And what he describes is a society that basically just consumes itself. And when you're reading it, you go, oh my God, don't let that happen here.
But so if in authoritarianism, if they want confusion, you are doing tons of research on this and you can't even figure out what's right and what's wrong. So in a way, you're confused as a result of not knowing where to look, right? I mean, so is that working, that campaign, that like no one has any idea and you're looking at it and you don't know?
There's several levels. I happen to know a guy who's a former VP of one of the 10 biggest companies in the world. I actually know the former CEO of Microsoft, the former president of Microsoft. He was helping me with my email one day. That's going to the top to get your email fixed. But this guy's a VP of a major corporation, very smart guy. And he said he read all the Kennedy assassination books. And he drew the conclusion that probably this is when he was younger, much, much younger. He said the conclusion he drew is that out of maybe 200 books, that a large proportion of them actually looked like they were there to throw debris into the story. And he says, I don't think from those public sources, he says, I don't think you can possibly put together a coherent picture. And that's sort of what I'm facing in this pedophile thing. The other demoralization part is they're doing it right in our faces. They're saying, I don't care. So when Biden's son sells paintings to an unknown person for $500,000, and they just say, we're not telling you who. Mm-hmm. So you go, what am I supposed to do now? At some point, that would have been a scandal. Clinton pardoned 1,120 people. And we all heard about Mark Rich, who was this, I think he was a Mossad, actually. And the Republicans went after him for doing that and chased him around. They said, this Mark Rich thing's terrible. And then one day on the news, I'm watching someone talk about the other pardons. They showed about 15 people who'd pardoned. One of them was some guy who got pardoned for having 800 kilos of coke. I go, hard to come up with a story that validates that, right? And I say, okay, the nephew of a drug lord who we need in our camp, so we did it, right? But I looked up Clinton's pardons. They're all bank fraud and drugs. All bank fraud and drugs. And so Clinton basically sold 1,120 pardons. The most appalling part is the Republicans knew this too, and they didn't use any of them. The Republicans have the January 6 tapes. McCarthy had them. Tucker had them. The new guy, what's his name? Johnson? I can't remember his name. I don't care about him. They all have 40,000 hours of tapes. They have not been released. Why? Here's a thought I had. It took me so long, I feel stupid. All through Trump's administration, anyone within 100 miles of Trump is battle scarred like they're in the movie Braveheart, right? They are scarred up. And that's on purpose, right? That's to make you think I'm not going to help Trump because it's too dangerous, right? I think that's the purpose. With one exception, the guy who came through incredibly unblemished was Pence. I go, the guy must be made of Teflon. And then I realized, no, he's on the other team. He was a spy the whole way. I don't have any evidence of this. I just know that no one attacked him. Rachel Maddow didn't attack him. No one attacked him. He was an inside man. And when they finally needed him on January 6th, he did what he had to do. But he was also a spy. He was close to the inner circle and could keep Trump's opposition, which was both parties, up to speed on what the hell's going on. Otherwise, there's no reason why he would have come out unblemished. They would have made shit up about him.
How do you wrestle with this? Because I go back and forth. So half these stories, I go, man, a bunch of these people in power are idiots. And then on the other side, it's like they keep controlling this narrative for a lot of the stuff you're looking at, which means they're incredibly capable. Like, how do you balance that where you think someone's an idiot and then you also go back and forth thinking they're geniuses, evil geniuses?
Well, because the guys we're seeing that are idiots are not doing it technically.
And so do you think this is all
the brains of the operation, the guys who run the world don't have Wikipedia pages, is one way of putting it, right?
Is that all the world's...
If you look inside the Trump White House, the Biden White House, there are guys in there who are not idiots inside the inner circle. Now, I'm appalled by them. Blinken, Merrick Garland, he stands up in front of Congress and says that the January 6th, that the protesters killed 5 cops. The Attorney General of the United States, completely bald-faced lie, bold-faced lie. And you go, well, he made a mistake. No, he did not make a mistake. There's no way the Attorney General of the United States didn't know that part of the story. And then it gets darker. So you got the Sicknick, who they wanted to make sure they had a death. They needed deaths. I think Ashley Babbitt, they needed a death. Sicknick, they needed a death. The evidence that Sicknick died from January 6th is 0. There's no evidence supporting it. The other 4 who died were suicides. As you look at the tapes of January 6th, how many cops do you think were there? If you had to take a wild guess, winner take all, right? Closest to the pin contest. How many would you say were there, cops?
Oh, I have no idea.
150?
Sure.
Right? 4 out of 150 committed suicide. And you go, wow, it was a really bad day. I go, well, look at the fucking cops who had to put off the George Floyd riots for 3 straight months. They weren't killing themselves. So why would 4 cops commit suicide? Why would Sicknick die? These are not unhealthy people. One bad day? You think January 6th was bad? Try going into some goddamn domestic violence situation. That's bad.
Yeah.
And you watch some of those riots, the George Floyd riots, where these guys, the cops are trying to hold down the fort and they're getting pummeled. But 4 guys committed suicide, maybe 5, right? Mm. Why? And I think the answer is they were whacked. I think Ashley Babbitt was whacked, not by that gunshot. And you know what? I wrote about it, and I couldn't finish it because I needed video. Pros didn't do it. A guy took all the footage from the Babbitt shooting, and he went through it piece by piece by piece and was throwing spaghetti at the wall. By the time you're done, you're going, and I read probably 2,000 comments where people said, oh, yeah, you take a look at this, take a look at this, take a look at this. There's so many things wrong with the Babbitt shooting. And I showed it to a couple of friends, including some really smart ones. They said, I see the point, but I'm not sure. So they were uneasy with the conclusion that there was something wrong. About a month ago, Cheryl Atkinson took it on. About a month ago, where she had 2 federal cops sitting there going over the footage of the Babbitt shooting saying, that's not right, that's not right, that's not right. Cheryl took it on, and she's good. And as that chick on the TV said, I had it, we had it. I didn't tell the story. I actually did. I talked about it a little bit, provided the link, said you be the judge. I think Ashley Babbitt was a prop. Ex-military, she'd be a good candidate for playing along. And there's no blood splatter. The guy who smashes through the window? If you watch the footage, he smashes through the window. He then scampers down the stairs going behind the cops, at which point the federal cops were watching the footage saying, you never let the guy behind you, right? So as soon as he smashes the window, he runs down, takes down a backpack, takes out a shirt, changes his shirt. What the fuck is that all about? And there's a guy like Ashley Babbitt's on the ground, and what you notice is they're jiggling her and wiggling her and screaming and oh my God, and it's just chaos. But what you'll notice is there's no health care being provided. There's no one ripping off her shirt, putting the hand on the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Plenty of guys are qualified to do at least that first wave of intervention. They're just taking photos. And then there's footage of her being taken out the building. On a gurney? No. They're taking her down the back steps. One guy with her arms, one guy with her legs, and she still has her fucking backpack on. And you go, this isn't right. And so you go, and then this one guy is taking out this medical kit. He's opening up this gauze pen. The guy who showed this first video that got me started on this, he's laughing about it. He's going, look at that guy. He's trying to get that gauze pen open. He finally gets up, and what's he do? He takes the gauze pen, he wipes off her shirt with it.
Oh, boy.
And you go, there's nothing. You see guys crossing paths in there. They're passing each other. There's a crazy crowd. And you can see they know each other. You can see by the way they interact. The guy says, look at that. These 2 guys know each other. And, hand on the back, that sort of thing. Talking to each other, looking suspicious. And Atkinson picked up on it. I think someone must have sent her that tape. But I told her, I said, there's more. You missed some. And they were doing CPR on her. Let me see. CPR on a woman with a neck shot. How's that going to work out? Yeah. It's going to be a super soaker is what it's going to be. Boompa, boompa, boompa. I think someone jammed a needle in her ass with KCL or something. I think I think it was faked. I think she's now dead. I don't think they took her to the Bahamas. And here's the other funny thing. I had seen videos of her before she got killed. There's 350 million people in this country, and I somehow had already seen her videos. And by the way, the guy who filmed the whole thing, the guy who got the best footage was John Sullivan, who supposedly was Antifa. And I've not only, he's everywhere. John Sullivan. Now, here's the other thing about John Sullivan. Before he became Antifa, he was a nationally ranked cyclist. Now, if I said, here's a guy who's a nationally ranked cyclist, tell me, is he Antifa or FBI? Which would you guess?
FBI.
Right. I've got footage of him interacting with Ray Epps. That's an odd pair to somehow be crossing paths. So it's the whole story. So the January 6th story is all fucked up. There's footage of Pelosi throwing a shit fit when she found out Trump was not coming to the Capitol. Just livid because she wanted him there. Mm-hmm. Right. The whole thing was a setup.
If we gotta go up one level, because I want your take on this. If this is like so much of what we see as a setup, and it's all due to peak centralization of power or authoritarianism, how does
control of the media and control of the media?
Right, control of the media. I know you are a fan of history. Like, how do societies get out of this peak authoritarian thing from the past? Like, how do you think we get out of this?
Well, the Soviets were around for 70 years. And the fact that everyone knew Stalin was killing people didn't make any difference. And so we have a less centralized risk. So we don't have a Stalin.
Yeah.
We don't have a Lenin. And Stalin and Lenin made no sense to me, especially Stalin. So I was doing a podcast, I said, Hitler makes sense to me at some level. So what Hitler did is he identified a group, declared them their enemy, and then killed them. So his Holocaust was an identified group saying, these people are subhuman, kill them. Mm-hmm. Stalin just killed people. Stalin, there's no discernible pattern. He didn't identify, Ukrainians and kill them. He killed prominent people for no reason. He was just a sick fuck. Not that Hitler wasn't sick. I don't want to be quoted on that one. But Hitler, you can kind of paint a picture of how a twisted bastard could go that path. Stalin, I can't even. But Mao supposedly killed. The Cultural Revolution killed a lot of people. And it's society eating itself. So in the Cultural Revolution, they convinced the young that their parents were the enemy. And the young killed their parents. And so if you read about authoritarianism, there's a lot of repeating patterns. And there's a question of why does it occur? Is it some premeditated thing, or is it just some infection? Some societal infection that kicks in, and someone exploits it. So a great book is The True Believer by Eric Hoffer. Okay. It's from 1953, and he describes mass movements and the various players in the mass movement and why they're in there and what they're doing. And so a perfect example of Hoffer's mass movement would be the climate change movement. It serves the purpose. People who are in the climate change movement are elevating their lives, bringing them purpose in a life that maybe they felt was lacking purpose. Mm-hmm. So the true believers tend to be people who are sort of down and out. And the first thing they say is, well, anything would be better than what we have. Yeah. So then you start accepting anything. Then, by virtue of accepting this tribalism, this new form of tribalism, you feel better because you're part of something big. You're part of something important. And as a consequence, your life has meaning now. Mm-hmm. So if you tell someone who's a climate changer that climate change is fake, you're actually taking away meaning from their life. I had a discussion with an immunologist yesterday about COVID vaccine, ivermectin. And I was stunned because this person didn't disagree. That I would have been fine. In fact, I'd be all ears. Tell me where I'm wrong about this. You read the literature too. This is not right. And I have a biochemistry friend who we chat about it a lot. He does try to get. This immunologist had no idea there was even debates. There was this disbelief that they would be giving it to children without a reason. I said, look, there's not a shred of evidence that kids die from COVID. Period.
Right.
Kids don't die from COVID. There's plenty of evidence that you can be hurt by the vaccine. Therefore, kids should not be getting vaccinated. That's easy. Mm-hmm. This immunologist did not know this debate was going on.
That's crazy.
I'm going, this is your Super Bowl. Yeah. You're an immunologist, and you didn't pay attention. Tell me how you explain that.
Man, that's crazy.
My colleagues, for example, I would say, I'm going to guess that probably 80% of them sort of bought the COVID story hook, line, and sinker. These are smart people. Mm-hmm. They say that intellects are easier to fake out, which could be me, right? That's why I worry. I go, well, if you're an intellect, then maybe you're being faked out. But the climate change story is a great example because it turns out the story falls apart very quickly if you actually start paying attention. You find out that the data just doesn't support it at all. Mm-hmm. At all. And I've given, hour talks on it to 500 people in a ballroom at a Vegas hotel, and only one person has disagreed. And then he gave a climate change talk the next year, and it was crap. So I realized by telling, say, college kids that climate change is fake, the problem is that they've been told since daycare by every authority figure that it's a crisis. Every authority figure told them it's a crisis. Every news outlet told them it's a crisis. And the analogy would be if you went to some church in Indiana and told them there is no God.
Yeah.
I mean, it just wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. I'm going to give my class a lecture on climate change. I'm going to say, look, I told them this in class today. Actually, I was talking about this. I said, I'm going to give this talk. It's not required. It's not part of the course. I said, I'm going to try to convince you there's no God. and I think I can. I mean, I had an hour sit down. You know, Konstantin Kaysin? Mm-hmm. I'm feeding you all these books to read and stuff.
Yeah.
Konstantin Kaysin, spelled with a K, Konstine, Kaysin, Kisin, was in a debate at the Oxford Union, and he gave the best 15-minute talk you ever heard on climate change. Mm. And it's brilliant. And I transcribed it, and I realized he speaks in fully edited sentences. All I had to do was put in punctuation marks. And it was brilliant. I got to sit down with him for an hour last October, and I said to him, when you started really thinking about climate change, how long did it take you to figure out it was bullshit? He said, a couple hours. Hmm. There's many people, Nobel Prize winning physicists, they tell the same story. They said, I was supposed to serve on a panel. And I realized I knew nothing, so I started reading about it. Within a few hours, I realized this is just crap. And so, the biggest lie, where the lie starts, is that there's no credible scientist who doesn't believe in climate change. Hmm. And then what you find out is, you'd be hard-pressed to find a solar physicist who does believe it. The solar physicist is how I go, see that big ball of fusion up there in the sky? That's what's doing it. Hmm. It's not you. It's not the CO2. CO2's not bad. And there's frauds and there's lying and there's very, very, the guy who ran NASA's temperature monitoring program says the temperature's not changing. The glaciers that are receding, they're so visual, right? You go, look at that, 1920, 2020, look at that. The glaciers receded massively. There must be climate change. What the receding glacier reveals underneath it is 1,200-year-old trees.
Oh.
They grew there 1,200 years ago. And then you find out that, the famous picture of the polar bear that appears to be starving to death?
Yeah.
Well, I'm in the middle of a podcast with QTR. I don't know if you know any of these guys, but and I realized in the middle of the podcast, I said, you don't know That polar bear could be 40 years old. It could have stomach cancer. It's just an emaciated polar bear. And they can eat anything they want. And then you find out that the world's expert on Arctic mammals says the polar bear population has tripled since 1970. You find out that the increasing salination of the seas turns out hasn't held up. You find out that people who are experts on reefs say, the reef going to shit, well, they cycle. It's back. Just nothing holds up.
Yeah.
Turns out it was warmer in the Middle Ages than it is now. Yeah, it's called the medieval warming period.
Oh, man.
There's no evidence whatsoever that more CO2 would hurt us. There's no evidence, And then there's the people who say, oh, you can see it. Like right now, there's no snow. Right? I'm looking out my window, no snow. It's January. Holy shit, this must be climate change. Here's the problem. If there is climate change, the temperature is moving up like some tiny fraction of a degree per year. The naked eye can't see that.
Yeah.
So if I look outside in January and it's -10, I can't say there's no climate change either, because a tenth of a degree, let's say it's a tenth of a degree, you can't see it. You go, and the sea level's rising the thickness of a dime. You go, oh, so that's why your backyard's flooded now? So these people are stupid. These people who no. There's people claiming that there's 900 more home runs a year hitting the Major League Baseball because of climate change. There's just insanity out there.
Oh, I haven't heard that one.
And there's people who claim that kids are going to get kidney stones from dehydration. I go, okay, let me see if I got this right. I live on the lake. If you go up the hill, the temperature probably changes 5 degrees. Are kids living on the lake going to get kidney stones and kids living up on the hill not going to get kidney stones?
Oh, right.
Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Right? But if you move from New York to Pennsylvania, will you get kidney stones? People in Florida must be getting massive kidney stones. So every single mindless journalist on the planet is smuggling climate change arguments into their articles that are just nonsense.
Yeah.
And so I encourage people, and when you dig into it, you find out, the American Physics Society put together an elite committee to say, look into this. About a dozen guys, include Steve Koonin, Caltech. I think it included Will Happer, Princeton, Freeman Dyson, very famous physicist from Princeton, elite group. And they came out of it and they said the science is crap. They're all deniers now. They're all deniers. I got into an argument with one of the prominent climate change people, and I said, she posted something, and I said, looks like fraud to me. She says, how can you say that? And I said, well, I said, look at figure 26. And I said, here's the problem with figure 26. And she said, well, you have to read the primary paper. And I went to the primary paper, and there it was. It was presented differently, and they had changed the axis. They had taken off the word modeling. And they know it because when you say modeling, you're going, well, we're just kind of mathematically mimicking. It's not data. It's not irrational, but it's not data. And so they took off the word modeling so that it looked like data. And I go, you fucking liars. Now, I didn't call her that. I just said, look, I went to the original literature. There it is. There's the problem. So she blocked me. Didn't want to hear that. Next thing I know, all the climate change guys have blocked me.
Oh, yeah.
I never picked on them on Twitter. I just got put on the block list. And so I would say that there's a huge percentage of the climate change community that probably knows they're full of shit, but who's being funded to study climate change. What I've asked people who believe in climate change, is it not true that if you wrote an NSF grant or a DOE grant or something like that, in which your preliminary data would seem to be pointing towards there being no climate change, would that grant ever be funded? And they all agree no.
Oh, man.
The only funded people are the ones finding climate change.
Well, I saw something yesterday, an article that came out that said some green energy something was $1.2 trillion of whatever, and then all the headlines said, but it's not enough. And I was like, if I was running a business as well, the most baseline thing, I would say, everyone paid me a lot last year, but it's not enough. Let's we need.
Well, so
we
then
need
you got
more.
John Kerry, who I'm tempted to just say is stupid and therefore, and stop thinking. But I watched John Kerry give a talk, and he was talking about how he had to spend $4 trillion. And someone from the audience goes, $6 trillion. He goes, yeah, $6 trillion. I'm going, you just changed your mind on the podium?
Yeah.
And then the other day, he gave a talk where he talked about how we have to take a certain amount of CO2 out of the atmosphere, and it'll cost this much per ton. We got to get this many tons out of the atmosphere. And someone did the math and said, that's $1.6 quadrillion you're talking about. So here's our climate czar who can't do fourth grade math.
Man. Wow.
And so this is the state of the field. Now, what all that money's doing is paying a lot of people to play along. You're selling solar panels. Are you going to start denouncing climate change? No.
No, you can't.
No.
Yeah.
It's the climate change industrial complex is way bigger than the military industrial complex. And so if you're selling electric cars, you're going to sign off on climate change. They're all getting subsidized. The money's thick. If you go against the grain, you lose your funding. You get kicked off out of the tribe. You get shunned.
Yeah.
And that's known. So, and then the guys who say, "Oh, look at all the increased hurricanes and severity." The guys who look at this say that over the last 100 years, there is no detectable signal that shows an increase in any extreme weather events. There's no slope. And then there was a big one last year, where they said the Arctic ice. They show the Arctic ice ebbing and flowing over a calendar year, and they have like 30 years superimposed. This band of ice going up to a maximum coming down the other side. And there's 2023, and it's totally off the band. And they're going, oh my God, it's here. It's finally here. And you look at it and you go, holy fucking. So then someone recreated the plot and plotted it as a deviation, as standard deviations. Mm-hmm. And it turns out it was 6 standard deviations. But that's like a 1 in a billion.
Yeah.
And you look at this going, so last year, 2022, there was nothing. In 2023, there was a 1 in a billion deviation. Do you really believe that? So I pull up the Fat Tony story from Nassim Taleb. Fat Tony is a funny story. Fat Tony gets asked by, we'll say, Vinny, hey, Tony, I've got a coin. I flipped it 30 times, comes up heads. It's a legitimate coin. What are the odds it's going to come up heads on the 31st? And Fat Tony, what are the odds it's going to come up tails on the 31st? And Fat Tony says 0. The guy says, no, it's 50-50. Fat Tony says, no, it's 0. And he says, why would you say that? And he says, the coin's rigged. And then he says, well, I told you it wasn't rigged. I told you it wasn't rigged. And Fat Tony said, you lied. And all of a sudden you go, oh yeah, it's a lot easier to accept a lie than 6 standard deviations. Then I noticed 2 things in the data, and this is a serious problem. One of the curves from another year in the month of November showed a 6 sigma deviation that was 1 month long. The Arctic sea ice, the Antarctic sea ice, a 1 month, 1 in a billion deviation. That was back to normal on the 2 sides.
Yeah.
Same 6 sigma thing. And then I notice is that you can see this plot all over the internet, and it's in theory data. And the fine structure of the data is different. Now, real data doesn't change. But this had different squiggles. Some of them don't have that deviation in November from that other year. Mm-hmm. And then someone comes out and says, oh, by the way, it turns out there's a strong southerly wind, which still doesn't explain 6 sigma, but the ice piled up. And so the actual size of the sheet was smaller, but the depth was higher. And there was no net change in the mass.
Oh, yeah.
And you go, okay, there's still a 6 sigma problem there, but that's funny. Yeah. Right. But what are the odds that they forgot to include depth, or they forgot to notice these big wind differences that year and things like that? They don't care. They want the story. They want the story because they want to tell you to eat bugs. They want to tell you to drive an electric car. So and then you get things like really funny. Like Lake Mead was almost empty, right? They were finding barrels of bodies and stuff, and that was really funny. I showed the slide of Lake Mead, and I said, so if you're a climate catastrophist, Lake Mead's about to get to the level where it no longer can take out water to power the generators. So you're not going to produce electricity. There's entire cities depending on Lake Mead. I go, so what would a climate catastrophist do? The answer is they'd buy an electric car.
Yeah.
So that's this. And so COVID, climate catastrophe, politics, it is all one big ball of absurdity.
We got to wrap up in about 5 minutes. I got to go pick up my daughter from school. So this goes back to one of your first statements about how you have this unique ability to look authority figures in the eye and say you're full of shit, right? Yeah. And everything is you seeking truth, and it drives you crazy when there's a cover up to the truth. Yeah, and authoritarianism, control of media, control of other things. Here's my last question, and then I got to go in a couple minutes. How are you not a Bitcoiner? This is it right here.
Because Bitcoin could be the same problem. So there's several layers of the onion. One is Bitcoin in itself is a bet. Yep. Much like gold, right? So there's no revenue stream. So it's a digital asset, and I get the blockchain thing and stuff, but it's still a digital asset, and I still worry about that. And people say, they can't do this. Well, there are problems that occur. I think at some point Bitcoin has two risks. One is that it gets absorbed by the state into normalness. So, for example, GLD was not good news for gold.
Yeah.
GLD swallowed up gold demand,
paper gold,
which kept people from buying actual gold. I think that was the purpose of GLD. Now, maybe GLD is fully gold backed, but if you bid up the price of GLD, how's that influence the gold demand, right? So I think it might be GLD was put there, A, just for betting, and B. Now, the other rumor that I haven't had refuted yet is that supposedly the first white paper on cryptocurrency was written by 3 NSA guys. And if that story holds up, then you got to say what, therefore, was the purpose and did it follow a path for a reason? I could imagine, and I'm ignorant compared to the hodlers, right? I haven't done my homework, and I get it. I've kind of decided, look, I'm just not going there. I'm an old man. I don't need to fuss with it, that sort of thing. And it's my fault. I know the hodlers, it drives them nuts. But Bitcoin and these various cryptos could be crowdsourcing digital currency for the authorities. So they're working out the bugs. They're getting people acclimated to the idea, enamored with the idea, and then they go, oh, by the way, here's the central bank digital currency.
Yeah.
And you and I both know the central bank digital currency is evil to the core.
Right.
So if somehow Bitcoin is inadvertently playing into the CBDC story, then that's a serious problem. The other thing is if Bitcoin is not absorbed by the state, it could be, in theory, destroyed by the state. And the maximalists just don't buy that story. But I say, look, here's the deal. If I'm in the United States and they say, look, if you use Bitcoin, we're going to charge you a $100,000 fine and put you in jail for 10 years. You say, they'd never do that. I go, don't tell a January 6th prisoner that story, because what I've learned in the last few years is there are no rules about putting you in jail now. Mm-hmm. We are doing things that I could not have fathomed. They've weaponized the Department of Justice in ways that are not imaginable, were not previously imaginable to me. I'm still astonished by it. And so if you either get absorbed by the state to make you normal, and then the advantage, then something about Bitcoin, I'm guessing it loses something. But the other is they try to destroy you. And if they say, look, you're going to get punished like crazy if you use Bitcoin, it can still be a black market thing, but it's got a very different footprint now. Most people will not touch it. And therefore it becomes this off Broadway thing,
Mm-hmm.
a toy for the hodlers. And so that's my big concern. Now, if you guys do battle with the state, and I conclude you're going to win, then I buy Bitcoin.
Mm.
I think at that point it might be cheap too, because I don't think the battle's going to lead to it's going to lead to bidding up of Bitcoin. They're going to beat it down if the battle ensues. And you listen to Lagarde and these guys; they're not. The things they say are not friendly to Bitcoin. They sometimes try to pretend like they don't care, but
no.
Would you bet the Lagarde doesn't care?
She does care.
I bet she does. Yeah, I bet she does care.
Yeah.
And so they're going to try to absorb it. It's like the Tea Party. The Tea Party wing. The Tea Party is now the Tea Party wing of the Republican Party. They just absorbed it.
Mm.
The MAGA guys will be absorbed. Right now, they're trying to deal with them. Right now, both parties agree MAGA should go. But I think MAGA will just become Republicans at some point. Mm. If they can't make them go away, then they'll just become the MAGA wing of the Republican Party.
Fair enough. I
had no idea whether you were a hodler or not, but
I am.
It's pretty rare.
I'm a big Bitcoiner, and I totally get the gold thing. Gold's Bitcoin's for young fogies instead of old fogies.
Well, there's nothing. But the other thing about revolutions, which Bitcoin certainly could be, is that revolutions are not led by old men. Mm. So if this is a legitimate revolution that will turn out to be historically important, it's right on target, the fact that it's a bunch of youngsters doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not going to be done by old men.
Right.
So you guys shouldn't even be worried about me. I'm not. I'm not supposed to be part of this plot. I'm part of normalizing it.
Yeah.
If I'm buying Bitcoin, if I buy Bitcoin, you should sell.
Well, Dave,
and we know that 30,000 cryptos have to go to hell in a handbasket too, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that in itself is going to be disruptive in some way. I don't know how, because
I agree with you.
Not imaginable to me what 30,000 cryptos do.
I know.
By the way, cryptos are also inflationary, in the sense that what are the cryptos worth? $2 trillion?
Yeah, something like that.
That's $2 trillion of perceived wealth that didn't exist from zero. That's like a cranking the M2 money supply to the extent. Let's say you were early. Let's say you're Max Kaiser. You're buying yachts and shit.
Yep.
With crypto that didn't exist before.
But isn't that absorbing the new M2 money supply rather than?
Well, the money you take from the Bitcoin goes back out to the yacht.
Okay.
So no.
I could see it going in too. It would be, instead of buying another vacation, I'm going to buy Bitcoin, which would actually be deflationary on the way in.
Well, is a treasury bill money? If I'm worth $1 million because I have treasuries, that certainly influences how I spend.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. True.
And so it certainly applies an inflationary pressure. So if you got a bunch of youthful Bitcoin millionaires, they're going to spend like millionaires.
True.
And so that's money that came from scratch. And I'm morally with you guys.
Right. That's why I ask.
Yeah, but there's a lot of us. I know a lot of old fogies like me who think it's going to turn into an NFT craze. It's got more meat on the bones than NFTs, but and only time will tell.
Right.
And I know a lot of hodlers who do sign off on these risks, and they know the guys who are in trouble are the ones who are unaware of these risks. Mm-hmm. Right? There are guys who just say, no, they can't touch me. Oh, they definitely can touch you. Whether they will is a separate issue.
Yeah. Well, Dave, I got to run. I really appreciate you taking the time. I will. And thank you. I will. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Okay.
I hope.
Well, if you want any recommended podcasters after me to see if you can elevate your game.
I would love that. I'll ask you off air.
Okay. If you need any help, let me know.
Thanks.